come to the conclusion over the course of this piece of research that whereas the modernists believed that form follows function, to understand architectural history properly and to escape from climate emergency caused by architecture responding badly to its energy needs, we have to see form following fuel, that energy is the key determinant of all architectural and indeed human affairs. So this piece of research involved looking at case studies across the history of architecture from 14,000 years ago in Ice Age Ukraine through to the present and the near future, dotting around the world to look at the ways in which human energy systems have interacted with and produced different sorts of architecture. I came up with the idea of asking this question, how does energy relate to architecture throughout human history, by when I was asked to write a book introducing architecture through its history for a popular audience. And I was trying to think of ways in which I could make the historical inquiry relate to contemporary issues. And by far the biggest contemporary issue in architecture is trying to avoid catastrophic climate change. Currently, the architectural world is responsible for 39% of all human carbon emissions. And that figure needs to drop to 0, and that's an enormous change that we need very, very fast. So I started wondering how energy had been used in architecture in the past. I looked at the biggest of all the ancient monuments, the Pyramid of Khufu, well over 5 million tons of stone, and I discovered that the total energy required to build it using human labor was the equivalent of the lifetime energy supply of just 7 contemporary American citizens. And I thought, this is a big story. And sure enough, it's just kept on and on and on, shocking me and exciting me in a slightly panic-making way because of its climate implications, to understand how radically the energy picture has changed over recent centuries thanks to fossil fuels, and how challenging it is to get away from that, but at the same time how enormous a body of precedent we have for that, how much historical architecture shows us ways of building zero carbon, circular architecture using local materials. Something as simple as glass requires a lot of energy to make. If you're making that energy in a farming society where you have to grow all of that energy as trees, it's very expensive, and the glass industry never gets very big. And if it does get big, it pushes up prices because it uses all the available firewood. Once you have fossil fuels, you can extract more fossil fuels, and the more you spend on digging fossil fuels out of the earth, the more money you have to expand fossil fuel production. And so you get a kind of endless boom, starting with the rise of coal in the 17th century. And that results in glass, in the course of 100 years, going from being a very rare material for very special, expensive projects to being in every window in England, for example, to the point where a diarist traveling around England comments in the 1660s, when she goes to places so poor that the peasants don't have glass windows. 100 years earlier, it was the king and the richest landowners. We are scarily locked into some of our energy use patterns by our buildings as they are and by our attitudes to how we expect them to be. So there is currently a worldwide tendency for buildings to aim for 21 degrees centigrade, whatever the weather outside, and to achieve that through extensive air conditioning and heating, depending on the climate. This is a habit so wasteful and so disastrous that it could make you weep. And it's a habit that actually originates from people selling air conditioning and heating, who then come up with guidelines that spread around the world to influence what people's idea of a comfortable building is in legislation around the world. So we are bound in to this terrible legislation, but it's very easy to correct. As soon as we want to correct it, we can stop insisting on buildings operating within such a narrow temperature range. We can live cooler in winter and hotter in summer and save enormous quantities of energy by doing so without any physical changes to fabric at all. It's just turning up or down a thermostat. think some people in the architecture world worry that achieving real sustainability will mean fewer jobs for architects. And in fact, that's by no means clearly the case. At the moment, a huge amount of our construction around the world is occurring in a very automated way with much less design input than used to be the case, much more that can be done by just clicking around on CAD. Whereas the job we really need to be doing now is not this very low labor, very high energy construction that we're locked into at the moment, but retrofitting the buildings we already have. We are now standing in a fabulous semi-ruined office block that could become anything it wants to, anything someone wants to make it, but it will require specific architectural engagement from really good designers to turn it into something that has a good energy performance and a good functionality for its new uses. And that is an enormous and very exciting challenge for architects. Similarly, when new buildings are needed, we need to be redesigning our entire set of materials and our entire set of assumptions about what a building is, how it functions, and what it's made of, to get away from our enormous current fossil fuel and energy dependence in our buildings. We need to stop using concrete and steel and go back to stone and earth and straw and wood. It's hugely exciting, hugely challenging, and we're completely capable of doing it, provided we want to. At the moment, the public are being lied to systematically about the building industry and in its widest sense and how sustainable it is becoming. There was recently a damning article by one of the Intergovernmental Committee on Climate Change report authors, saying that architecture, that the built environment had changed less than any other industrial sector in response to the need to decarbonize, despite the fact that we talk about it all the time. So at the moment, there are hoardings everywhere around building sites that lie to the public and say that what's happening behind them is sustainable, when in fact it's producing tens of thousands of tons of carbon dioxide. As soon as you tell the public about the scale of these carbon emissions and compare them to individual personal effort, people see how important it is to take action on this. For example, there is a current project to replace a shop in central London, a large department store, with a new building. If they do it, it will cost 40,000 tons of carbon dioxide to demolish and replace the existing building. If you put that in terms of individual actions to reduce carbon, imagine moving to a cold shower every day to save the carbon it costs to heat your shower. Your cold shower every day, to save 40,000 tons of carbon dioxide, would have to go on for the next 680,000 years. Individual actions are dwarfed. They're totally appropriate, but they are dwarfed by our building industry continuing to do terribly wrong things, often purely for developer profit, in a way which replaces a building with an essentially similar building, makes more money by doing so. And that is so self-evidently disastrous that when people know about it, they can't not react. My key message to everyone involved in the building sector, from students up, to quantify accurately and honestly. Look at the figures. If what you are doing is going to cost another 10,000 tons of carbon dioxide, don't do it that way. Talk to the client, get them to compromise their definition of what they need, get them to reduce their ambitions. They're always happy to cut their budget. Help them to cut their carbon budget, and be honest with them, because when you talk to people honestly, you move the responsibility for the decision making about that carbon to the people. So right from student stage onwards, you can spread the word to people who don't yet know about this. All your friends and family should be bored with hearing from you about the damage that our industry in its widest sense is doing and how avoidable that is.
No, I'm excited for the lecture.
Oh, thank you very much.